It is 6:14 on a Thursday morning in a quiet neighborhood outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Gerald is sitting at his kitchen counter with a printed brokerage statement spread flat under both hands. The overhead light catches the edge of a coffee mug he poured 20 minutes ago but hasn't touched, and the number at the bottom of the page reads $487,200 in total retirement assets. His index finger rests just below a line showing a single-month drop of $41,370, and the paper has a small crease where he folded it once and then unfolded it as if hoping the figure would change. The furnace hums low in the background, and outside the window the sky is that gray-blue color that hasn't committed to daylight yet. Gerald is 63 years old, 8 months into retirement, and for the first time since he left his job, he feels the ground shifting beneath something he thought was solid. His hand moves slowly across the statement, tracing the column of monthly withdrawals he's been taking to cover his living expenses since September. Each withdrawal is $4,100, and each one has come directly from the same account that just dropped by more than 10 times that amount in 30 days. He can feel the math pressing against his chest even though he hasn't written anything down yet. The problem isn't that the market went down. He expected that eventually. The problem is that he sold shares to pay his electric bill on the same week those shares lost 14% of their value. Gerald's situation is not unusual. The majority of retirees who build a portfolio during their working years enter retirement with no formal plan for how to actually spend it down when markets turn against them. There is a name for what Gerald is experiencing, and it is one of the most destructive forces in retirement finance, something called sequence of returns risk. Most people have never heard that term. It means that when you withdraw money matters just as much as how much you withdraw, and the strategy that protects against it is simpler than you think. But it requires you to organize your money in a way that goes against every instinct you've built over 40 years of saving. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how sequence of returns risk quietly erodes a retirement portfolio, even when long-term market averages look perfectly healthy. You'll see why pulling income from the wrong account at the wrong time can cost you tens of thousands of dollars over a 15-year stretch. You'll learn how to divide your retirement savings into separate time-based segments that each serve a distinct purpose. And you'll walk away with a framework you can apply to your own accounts before the next downturn arrives. You don't need a finance degree to follow this. You just need to stay focused and be willing to rethink one assumption you've probably been carrying for years. When you were working, your paycheck showed up every 2 weeks regardless of what the stock market did on any given Tuesday. And that steady rhythm made the volatility in your 401k feel like background noise you could safely ignore. Retirement changes the equation entirely, because now your portfolio is the paycheck, and every dollar you pull out is a dollar that can never recover if the market rebounds the following month. Most retirees have their savings spread across 2 or 3 account types: a traditional 401k or IRA funded with pre-tax dollars, a Roth IRA funded with after-tax dollars, and often a regular taxable brokerage account sitting alongside them. If you've just stepped into retirement, or you're within a few years of it, think about your own situation for a moment. Do you have a specific plan for which account you'd tap first if the market dropped 20% next quarter? The answer to that question shapes everything that follows, and most people discover they've never actually made that decision deliberately. Think of your retirement money the way a builder thinks about constructing a house in a region where storms roll through every few years. You wouldn't put all your lumber, wiring, and glass in one pile on the open ground and hope the weather cooperates. You'd store the materials you need first in a sheltered place close to the foundation, keep the midterm supplies under a solid roof nearby, and leave the long horizon materials in a warehouse where time and distance protect them. That image, foundation, shelter, and warehouse, is the architecture behind the bucket strategy. And it works because it separates what you need soon from what you need later. So a storm in the market never forces you to tear apart materials you haven't finished building with yet. Your traditional 401k and traditional IRA hold money that has never been taxed, and every dollar you withdraw from those accounts gets added to your ordinary income for the year and taxed at whatever federal bracket that dollar falls into. The IRS treats these withdrawals the same way it treated your salary. The money shows up on your 1040 as income, period. If you pull $60,000 from a traditional IRA in a single year while also collecting Social Security, that combined income determines not just your tax bill, but a cascade of other costs most people don't anticipate. Understanding how each account type behaves when you actually spend it is the difference between a controlled drawdown and a slow financial leak. This is the raw material, the bricks and beams, that you need to understand before you start building anything. Your Roth IRA and Roth 401k sit on the opposite side of the tax ledger because you already paid taxes on the money before it went in, and qualified withdrawals in retirement come out completely tax-free at the federal level. That means a $40,000 Roth withdrawal does not add a single dollar to your adjusted gross income, does not push you into a higher tax bracket, and does not trigger any of the income-based surcharges that penalize retirees who show too much reportable income. The contrast matters enormously because two retirees with identical spending needs and identical total savings can end up with wildly different tax bills depending on which account they pull from in which year. Roth money is the sheltered material, the supply you protect so it's available exactly when the storm hits, and you need something that won't cost you extra to use. Most retirees underestimate how powerful that flexibility becomes once they see the full picture of how income thresholds work. Your taxable brokerage account holds investments you bought with after-tax dollars, but unlike a Roth, the gains inside it are not tax-free. They're taxed as capital gains, either short-term or long-term depending on how long you held them. Long-term capital gains rates sit at 0, 15, or 20% depending on your total taxable income, which makes this account a middle ground tool with its own strategic timing. If you've been investing outside of retirement accounts for years, this is the warehouse in the analogy, the pool of assets that gives you options when you need to control how much taxable income hits your return in any given year. Now that you can see the three types of material clearly, the question becomes how to use each one at the right time. The intuition most retirees carry into retirement is straightforward and feels entirely logical. Withdraw from whatever account has the most money in it, or withdraw from the taxable account first because that's what their advisor mentioned years ago, or simply take from each account in proportion to its size. That instinct comes from decades of accumulation thinking, where the goal was always to grow the total number as large as possible without worrying much about the order of withdrawals. The reasoning seems sound because you're spending the same amount either way, so why would the source of the withdrawal matter? Here is why it matters. If you withdraw $50,000 from a traditional IRA in a year when you're also receiving $28,000 in Social Security benefits, your combined provisional income can push you past the threshold where up to 85% of your Social Security becomes federally taxable. The difference between the 12% tax bracket and the 22% bracket for a married couple filing jointly is a jump that happens at a specific income line, and crossing it by even a few $100s means every additional dollar above that line costs nearly twice as much in federal tax. That jump is not gradual, it is a cliff, and most retirees walk right up to the edge without realizing they've crossed it until they file their return the following April. The quiet cost of that miscalculation in a single year can be $3,200 to $5,800 in additional tax that didn't need to happen. Multiply that by 12 or 15 years, and the total becomes a number that would stop most people mid-sentence if they saw it on paper. The second invisible consequence lands on your Medicare premiums through a mechanism called IRMAA, the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. Medicare looks at your modified adjusted gross income from 2 years prior, and if that number exceeds certain thresholds, your Part B and Part D premiums increase by surcharges that can push your monthly cost to over $400 per person instead of the standard $185 base premium. A married couple who both trigger IRMAA at even the first surcharge tier can pay an additional $4,700 per year in Medicare costs that would have been completely avoidable with different withdrawal planning. The thresholds are not extreme. For a married couple filing jointly, the first IRMAA tier kicks in at $206,000 of modified adjusted gross income, and a large traditional IRA withdrawal, combined with Social Security and capital gains, can reach that line faster than you'd expect. This is money that leaves your household permanently, not because you earned more, but because your income showed up on the wrong line of the wrong form in the wrong year. The third consequence is the taxation of your Social Security benefits, and it connects directly to everything above. If your combined income, which the IRS calculates as your adjusted gross income plus non-taxable interest, plus half of your Social Security, exceeds $44,000 for a married couple filing jointly, up to 85% of your Social Security benefit becomes taxable at your ordinary income rate. Run the numbers on your own withdrawals from last year, and you'll see whether this has already started happening to you. Most retirees who pull steadily from traditional accounts find that their Social Security is being taxed at or near the maximum rate without them ever having made a conscious choice about it. That means a benefit you thought was $2,400 per month is effectively reduced to something closer to $2,000 or less after federal and possibly state taxes. The cascade works like this. A large traditional IRA withdrawal raises your AGI. The higher AGI makes more of your Social Security taxable. The newly taxable Social Security raises your AGI further, and the higher AGI potentially triggers IRMAA surcharges on top of everything else. Each layer feeds the next, and the total cost is always larger than any single layer would suggest. Gerald, sitting at that kitchen counter in Charlotte, had been pulling $4,100 per month from his traditional IRA because that was the simplest approach, and his advisor had never discussed alternatives in any detail. He didn't realize that those withdrawals, combined with his $2,180 monthly Social Security benefit, had pushed his combined income past every threshold that triggers additional costs. The $41,370 market drop wasn't just a paper loss for him. It was a permanent reduction in shares he'd sold at depressed prices to fund withdrawals that were simultaneously inflating his tax bill and his Medicare premiums. The dominoes keep falling, and once they've fallen, you cannot pick them up and set them back in a row. The real cost of a disorganized withdrawal strategy isn't what you lose in a single year. It's the cumulative damage compounded over 15 to 20 years of retirement spending. Consider a retiree withdrawing $55,000 per year entirely from traditional accounts while collecting $26,000 in Social Security. The math shows that over 18 years, the unnecessary tax drag and Medicare surcharges can total between $78,000 and $112,000 in avoidable costs, depending on bracket positioning and capital gains levels. That's money that never gets reinvested, never compounds, and never passes to a surviving spouse or heirs. The math is not dramatic. It is slow, methodical, and relentless, like water finding every crack in a foundation over years of freeze and thaw. There is a window in retirement that most people either don't know about or don't use correctly, and it sits between the year you stop working and the year you turn 73, when required minimum distributions from traditional accounts begin. During this golden window, your taxable income often drops sharply because your salary is gone, but your RMDs haven't started yet, which means the lower tax brackets are sitting empty and available in a way they never were during your highest earning years. Most retirees coast through this period pulling the same flat amount from the same account every month, completely unaware that they are wasting the lowest cost tax years they'll ever see again. The foundation of a good retirement drawdown plan is recognizing that these years are finite, and every empty bracket you don't fill strategically is an opportunity that closes permanently once RMDs begin flooding your return with mandatory taxable income. This window typically lasts 5 to 10 years, and what you do inside it shapes the tax landscape of your entire remaining retirement. The counterintuitive move is to actually pay more tax during these low-income years by converting portions of your traditional IRA into a Roth IRA while the brackets are cheap. A Roth conversion means you take money from your traditional account, pay ordinary income tax on it now at your current rate, and move it into a Roth where it grows tax-free and comes out tax-free for the rest of your life. The math works because paying 12 or 22% on a conversion today prevents that same money from being taxed at 24% or higher when RMDs force it out later, and it simultaneously reduces the size of the traditional account that generates those future RMDs. Most people resist this because it feels wrong to voluntarily write a check to the IRS in a year when you could have owed very little. But the math doesn't reward how the decision feels. It rewards where you place each dollar on the long arc of your retirement tax return. Every dollar you convert from a traditional IRA to a Roth moves from a bucket that will be taxed at an unknown future rate to a bucket that will never be taxed again. Over 20 years, a dollar converted at the 12% bracket that would have eventually been taxed at 24% has effectively doubled its after-tax growth advantage compared to leaving it where it was. The conversion also shrinks your future RMD balance, which lowers your future AGI, which protects your Social Security from excess taxation and keeps your Medicare premiums at the standard rate. Think of it as reinforcing the foundation now, while labor is cheap, instead of waiting until the storm forces emergency repairs at 3 times the cost. This is the core insight, and it is worth stating plainly. The retiree who pays slightly more tax in the right years and pulls from the right accounts in the right order will keep significantly more of their own money than the retiree who pays the least possible tax each year without looking at the full picture. Ask yourself which tax bracket you're actually sitting in right now, and whether you've been filling the cheap brackets or letting them go empty while your traditional IRA quietly grows into a larger and larger tax liability waiting at 73. Retirement isn't about paying the least tax this year. It's about paying the least tax over every year you have left. Eleanor is 62 years old, recently retired from a hospital administration role in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and she has $310,000 in a traditional 401k that she rolled into a traditional IRA, $47,500 in a Roth IRA she contributed to sporadically during her late 50s, and $83,200 in a taxable brokerage account she built from an inheritance. Her Social Security benefit, which she began claiming at 62, is $1,740 per month, and her total annual living expenses, including insurance, property tax, and a modest travel budget, run about $51,600. She and her husband file jointly, and his Social Security adds another $2,210 per month, bringing their combined benefit to $47,400 per year before taxes. Eleanor's instinct was to cover the gap between Social Security and expenses entirely from her traditional IRA, which meant withdrawing about $4,200 each year to close the $4,200 shortfall. But because she also pulled extra to cover a roof repair and a new car down payment, her total traditional IRA withdrawal in the first year hit $23,800. Combined with their Social Security, that pushed their provisional income past $44,000, triggered taxation on 71% of their benefits, and landed the additional income squarely in the 22% bracket instead of the 12%. If your situation looks anything like Eleanor's, covering all your gaps from one account without checking where the bracket line falls, you're not alone. But you should know that choice is quietly costing you thousands in taxes and Medicare adjustments every single year. Her net unnecessary cost that year was approximately $4,380 in additional federal tax and the beginning of an IRMAA trajectory for 2 years later. Robert is also 62, retired from an engineering firm near Durham, North Carolina, and his accounts look similar in total but different in structure. $265,000 in a traditional IRA, $104,600 in a Roth IRA built up over a decade of consistent contributions and one rollover, and $61,400 in a taxable brokerage account. His Social Security is $1,810 per month, his wife's is $2,050, and their combined annual expenses are $52,400, which is close enough to Eleanor's to make the comparison meaningful. He and his wife file jointly and are both in good health with longevity on both sides of the family. Robert approached the same gap differently because he understood the architecture of his accounts before he started pulling. He withdrew $11,200 from his taxable brokerage account using shares with long-term gains that qualified for the 0% capital gains rate at his income level, and covered the rest of his spending gap with a $6,800 Roth withdrawal that added nothing to his adjusted gross income. His total taxable income for the year was essentially just their combined Social Security plus a small amount of interest and dividends, which kept their provisional income well below $44,000 and meant only about 32% of their Social Security was subject to tax. By staying inside the 12% bracket with room to spare, Robert avoided $3,740 in federal tax that Eleanor paid and kept his Medicare trajectory completely clean. The difference in 1 year was $4,380 versus roughly $640 in total additional tax beyond the baseline, a gap of over $3,700 that compounds every year the pattern continues. His total combined portfolio barely shrank compared to Eleanor's, but his tax footprint was a fraction of hers. Robert then used the remaining empty space in the 12% bracket, roughly $27,400 of unused room, to execute a Roth conversion from his traditional IRA, paying approximately $3,290 in federal tax on the conversion, but permanently moving that money into a tax-free account. That conversion reduced his future RMD balance by $27,400, which means when he turns 73, the IRS will force him to withdraw less from his traditional IRA each year, which keeps his AGI lower, which protects his Social Security from heavier taxation, and avoids IRMAA surcharges on Medicare for both him and his wife. The math on that single conversion, projected over 20 years of tax-free growth inside the Roth, saves Robert's household between $9,600 and $14,200 in cumulative future taxes, depending on what brackets look like when RMDs begin. If your income is low this year because you recently retired, or you're in that window before RMDs kick in, this is your opportunity, and it won't stay available once mandatory distributions start filling your brackets for you. Projected over 18 years of retirement, the cumulative difference between Eleanor's approach and Robert's is approximately $67,400 in total tax and Medicare savings, assuming Robert continues to optimize his bracket space each year and Eleanor continues her current pattern. That number doesn't include the additional Roth growth that Robert captures by converting during low-income years, which pushes the total benefit closer to $84,000 or more. The foundation you build in the first 5 years of retirement determines whether the house stands strong through every storm that follows. The first thing to do is sit down with your most recent statements from every retirement account you own: traditional IRA, Roth IRA, taxable brokerage, any old 401k you haven't rolled over, and write the current balance of each one on a single sheet of paper. Next to each balance, write the tax character of that account: pre-tax, tax-free, or taxable with gains. This exercise takes 15 minutes and gives you the blueprint that everything else builds from. You cannot design a withdrawal strategy for accounts you haven't inventoried clearly. The second step is to map every source of income you'll receive this year and the approximate amount: Social Security for you and your spouse if applicable, any pension, any part-time work, rental income, interest, and dividends from taxable accounts. Add those up and compare the total to your annual spending need, because the gap between guaranteed income and expenses is the number you need to fill from your portfolio. That gap is the only number that matters for planning which accounts to tap. If your guaranteed income already covers 90% of your expenses, the strategy looks very different than if it covers only 60%, and both are workable once you see the structure clearly. The third step is to fill that gap using the account sequence that keeps your taxable income inside the bracket you want to stay in, starting with taxable account withdrawals that qualify for favorable capital gains rates, supplementing with Roth withdrawals that add nothing to your AGI, and using traditional IRA withdrawals only up to the point where the next dollar would push you into a higher bracket. Once the gap is filled, look at how much room remains in your current bracket and consider whether a partial Roth conversion makes sense to use that remaining space before the year ends. Every dollar of empty bracket space that expires on December 31st is a discount you can never reclaim. This is the builder checking the forecast, pouring the concrete while the weather is clear. The fourth step is to do this review before October of each year, so you have time to act on what you find. Estimate your full year income by September, compare it to the bracket thresholds, and decide whether to convert, harvest gains, or adjust your withdrawal mix for the remaining months. Your next move is the one that matters most. Before this year ends, sit down with a CPA or a fee-only financial planner who understands retirement tax planning specifically, because the cost of one good session is a fraction of what you'll save over a decade of optimized withdrawals. Not every advisor thinks about this in terms of bracket management and IRMAA avoidance, so ask directly whether they plan withdrawals across account types on a year-by-year basis. Gerald, back at that counter in Charlotte, eventually found his way to a planner who restructured his entire drawdown approach over the course of 2 afternoon meetings. He stopped pulling exclusively from his traditional IRA, opened a systematic withdrawal plan from his taxable account for the first half of each year's spending gap, used Roth funds to cover irregular expenses without spiking his AGI, and began converting a disciplined amount each December into his Roth, while the 12% bracket still had room. The $41,370 market loss didn't disappear, but it stopped compounding into a tax problem layered on top of an investment problem. Within 2 years, his Medicare premiums dropped back to the standard amount. His Social Security taxation fell from 85% to just under 50%, and his overall annual tax bill decreased by $3,860 compared to his first year of retirement. The foundation of a retirement that weathers every storm is not a bigger portfolio or a better stock pick. It is the architecture of how you spend what you've already saved. Every beam you place in the right position now holds weight for decades, and every one you leave out of place creates a crack that only widens under pressure. The shelter was always there inside your accounts, waiting for you to build it with intention instead of habit. That is the quiet truth about retirement income. The money you keep is determined less by the market and more by the decisions you make at your own kitchen counter on an ordinary Thursday morning. If you've been pulling from one account without checking where the brackets fall, drop a comment and tell me what you're planning to change this year. Those conversations help everyone here see the real numbers behind real decisions. And if this gave you even one idea that could save you money over the next decade, a like helps other retirees in the same position find this before they make the same mistakes. The best time to build the right foundation was 5 years ago, but the second best time is the first week you decide to stop guessing.